This is Joe Dancy with Southern Methodist University Maguire Energy Institute.
Thank you for joining the program, and we are entering into our year in review interviews, our year in review topics, our year in review just overall content, if you will. And so we're happy to have Joe Dancy come in, one of our regulars here on the Crude Life, as well as an energy expert, energy educator, and just all around good guy. How you doing today?
Hey, pretty good. It's finally we got some cold here in Dallas, but it's warmed up today. But Lord knows we need to suck some of that natural gas into some of our furnaces to get the price up a little bit, Jason.
I tell you, ain't that the truth? Are they still paying people to take it out of there instead of charging people?
Oh yeah, in some areas it's getting much better with the pipeline systems out there in the Permian Basin. But yeah, for a while this summer it was pretty bleak. It was, if you can't flare it, it's you can actually had to pay people to take it away. And the interesting thing is, talking to some of the state land people, they, how do you get a royalty when you're actually giving people money or paying them to take your gas away? And actually is there a negative royalty that gets credited against the state lands? And they were wrestling with that, and I don't know what the answer is, but I thought it was a darn good question.
I'll tell you what, you're something that the folks probably don't believe, but I had down as one of my topics as stories of the year or interviews of the year, or however you want to frame it, is the actual negative price, if you will, of natural gas in the Permian. To me, that tells the story. When you look at the annals of the shale revolution, the fact that you actually had such an abundance of natural gas that the energy companies were still making enough money and were still able to make the numbers work in order to pay people to come take that natural gas out instead of, having people pay them like is the traditional model of our economy. And, all the little slivers that come through it, like you mentioned, the royalty owners and all those other things, that truly is one, I would say, not the top, but it would be in the top 10. Would you put it in the top 10 for stories of the year or energy issues of the year, if you will?
Actually, I would put it in the top 10. And of course, as you know, what most people do if they can get the permit is they, instead of paying people to take it away, they flare it. And in theory, you're only supposed to flare for a relatively short period of time, but you can get extensions based on, certain factors, and you have to go to the agencies and explain what's going on. And each state's a little bit different. I tell you what, your buddies in North Dakota, they've done a relatively good job in getting, the flaring issue under control. Because as you know, you flare gas, and it has absolutely no value. At least if you're paying someone to take the gas away, it's being used in a feedstock somewhere to heat somebody's house or power an electric generator. But if you're flaring it, I mean, it's gone forever, and it's pretty light. That's about it. The flaring has been a huge issue all year, as well as just natural gas prices and natural gas capacity, and paying people negative prices to take that stuff away. And yeah, you're right. That's a big issue, and I didn't even consider that as one of my major issues of the year. But I would put it in the top. Actually, I'd probably put it in the top 5. Quite frankly,
I was going to say if we're going to talk about flaring, that's easily top 5, maybe even top 3, because in fact in North Dakota it's such an issue. In about a week and a half, they're going to have a kind of a big meeting. It's a public hearing for flaring in the state capitol. They're going to have it because they're I don't know if they've hit the mark more than twice in a year in the past year as far as their goals that they set for themselves. So they've been having some real troubles keeping the numbers down. Of course, what we talked about down in the Permian, same exact issues there, trying to figure out a way to redirect it, trying to figure out a way to get it to the market. And that's the big problem in North Dakota. They just don't have the infrastructure built yet. And you mentioned down in Texas with the pipelines. What are you hearing? What are you, I guess you go to conferences, what are they saying in terms of some of the solutions when it comes to flaring?
Well, there really isn't a whole lot of solutions besides building out the gas pipeline system and gas gathering system. And I know in Texas we've had a bunch of capital spend going into the ground to address that issue. And also, I won't say this, in North Dakota, when I was up there this summer, just a couple of months ago, I was over at the Freiburg rail terminal, and they were actually, they were taking, it wasn't natural gas, but they were liquefied natural gas, which, they strip out the propane and the ethane, and I guess it is a portion of the natural gas. So, but instead of flaring it, they're sticking it on rail cars. And I think we've talked about this before, but, we asked a bunch of regulators who were with me. It was the Interstate Oil and Gas Compact Commission. It's like, where are you shipping that? My expectation, Jason, is they're going, we're shipping it to a chemical factory in Wyoming or a chemical factory in Nebraska. But it's like, well, no, they're shipping, the propane and ethane and I forget the other one is Z5 or X5 or something. It's going to Mexico. And that's it. That's great for trade, and it's great for North Dakota, and it's great for the Mexicans because as you know, in Mexico, you don't have private mineral ownership, and it's tough to deal with the Mexican government getting leases, getting concessions, getting help, and it's also dangerous as heck in some areas to actually work, without having an army protecting you. And so for everybody, it's a win-win. Other than, as you know, you start shipping around flammable stuff in rail cars, and even though they're really, really safe, and they've redesigned the cars, and accidents happen, and those babies, if they go off the track and they get ruptured, you can have quite a fire, unfortunately.
What's interesting about that is so much of this, in my opinion, is what is on the first wave or the first layer that people can see. And just to comment on your Mexican part, I actually think the natural gas is a candidate for Story of the Year as well, just on some of the innovation. The Mexican market that's been salivating for natural gas for all those reasons you just mentioned before. Some of the innovation that's happened with natural gas, the amount of pipelines that are being built to help out natural gas. So to me, natural gas is one of those probably top two stories. And a contender, which I want to transition to, also I think rig counts is another one. We'll get to that in just a second. But the way that you were talking, I wanted to transition to the California wildfire, which is so much of the narrative right now is to go towards renewable. And so much research is coming back now that California, if people, whether they like it or not, is a guinea pig for what's going on in the renewable transformation and the issues that they're having, trying to play Mother Earth, trying to be the environmentalists out there. It's Yellowstone all over again. They're having problems because it seems more and more evidence every single day for these wildfires is pointing to the shift to renewables. Do you know what I'm talking about with that?
Yeah, and it's a great transition because natural gas is some of the cleanest, cheapest fuel to burn the turbines, the electrical turbines. And we see more and more natural gas plants going up. And part of the problem, Jason, as you know, not necessarily in Texas and North Dakota, but elsewhere in the East Coast, to get the natural gas from the well to the power plant is difficult. And even even in Minnesota, let me put this out. I think it was last winter, where you heat your house, a lot of houses with natural gas, and you also run the electrical turbines with them. And if there's a shortage of natural gas, then you have a real problem. Do you turn off the electricity and shut down the turbine, or do you cut people's heat off from their gas furnaces? And
can I interject real quick? Because
sure.
Not only was it Minnesota, it was also Chicago, because in the turbines with the wind energy, if you don't have wind, it's a problem, but also if you have too much wind, it's a problem. So the real issue last year was when you had the blizzards, because the wind was going too fast to turn the wind turbines when the natural gas was being used for people's furnaces.
Yeah, that's exactly. And actually, Detroit, Michigan had the same issue. And there's a couple issues there. This shocked me. I didn't realize. When you get around 50 miles an hour, apparently the wind turbines they kick off. The reason they do that, apparently, if they turn too fast, the electrical the alternating current doesn't quite fit into, it doesn't synchronize into the system real well as you have some issues, I guess, apparently with blade flex and potential issues. And also, and this is not a problem in Dallas or Oklahoma, but it is a problem in North Dakota and in Minnesota when you get, and I forget what the number is, but it's either minus 10 degrees Fahrenheit or minus 20, and the wind turbines also automatically cut off. I don't know why they do that, but I mean, I've read the specs that, and that was a big issue in Minnesota too. It's like, gee, when we need our wind turbines and it's relatively windy out and it's like 20 below, they're sitting there not producing because either it's too windy or it's too cold, and you got to go back to the old natural gas or even coal. And I love coal. I think it's a great resource. I mean, not totally environmentally friendly, but it's friendly enough with all the technologies that we've adopted. I visited some coal plants in Oklahoma within the last couple of years, and you show up at the gate and they got to check you in and they run you through all sorts of security to make sure you're legit. And yeah, it's a pretty big deal to get into a coal plant or anything these days. But I look up and you see the smokestack. There's nothing coming out of it. And I mentioned to the guard, gee, it's too bad. I thought they'd be running today. I'm here to visit and for my, take some notes for my classes. And oh no, we're running full power, 100%. It's like you could not tell from the smokestack, other than they did say, if you came back here and it was like 20 or 10 degrees, what you would see coming up would be white billowing, but it would not be soot. It would be water vapor, and it'd be condensing. And so coal has come a long way, but natural gas especially. So that's to transition from your comments. Natural gas is a huge story also because number one, it's abundant, it's cheap, it's really great to use for peaker plants as well as just full-time baseload natural gas generating plants, environmentally friendly. Of course, more and more people now are coming to the conclusion, at least environmentalists, that maybe this stuff, we want to go totally emission free, which means solar or wind turbine. And as you note, there's some severe problems with wind turbine, the utility wind turbines, and I've looked at some residential wind turbines because this is pretty cool. I'll go check these out. And number one, the economics don't work, and number two, when you put in your backyard a device that's 60 feet in the air or higher that weighs like 1,200 pounds, you got to sort of worry if it falls over, it doesn't come into your bedroom or your neighbor's bedroom. And number two, it's sticking up there, and you guys get the same deal you have here in Texas. I mean, in the summer we get, these thunderstorms come through, and you got a piece of copper sticking up, 60 feet or more in the air. It's like a lightning rod sticking up. And so what I've been told, even by the manufacturer, he said, these get struck by lightning all the time. And when they do, depending on, the degree of how big the bolt is and how it strikes, it'll rip things apart. Then he goes, then the problem is, and I don't know how you are, but I can climb up a 6-foot ladder and put up Christmas lights, but if you got to go up and about once a year or twice every other year and do some maintenance or check things out if it's been struck by lightning, and to climb up a 60-foot tall pole and then do the maintenance, you can't just take the motor off and stick it in your pocket and climb back down. I mean, you got to do the maintenance 60 feet in the air hanging off, and of course you don't do it. And of course, whoever comes, the electricity, I mean, you're going to pay brain surgeon prices, and you should, because I mean it's dangerous stuff to get up there, and there's not a whole lot of. I mean, even electricians, bless their hearts, they know better than the hanging off a wind turbine 60 feet in the air while they're messing with the rotors that are that weigh 50 pounds each. So anyway.
How about over on the California side? I mentioned the California wildfires. How it just seems more and more evidence is pointing to the fact that there was a mandate to go renewable. With whether it's a power company declaring bankruptcy, cutting back on the the cutting of the tree branches. It could have been the strain on the grid at certain times. It just seems like more and more the evidence keeps pointing back to that it was the push of the renewables and the speed of the push to those renewables that this is all part of the ripple that's coming back from it.
Yeah, exactly. And part of the deal in California, they, with their tax incentives, every movie star had their own wind turbine. And unfortunately for them, a lot of the stuff they put in is more than a decade old now. So it's old technology. And so you stick those wind turbines on the grid. And the other thing, Jason, that I didn't realize was the fact that I've been teaching energy law now for 3 or 4 years. And one of the things doing the research was these power lines, they are and always have been a fire hazard. You really have to go, and at least in Dallas, when you go around and you look at the power lines, there's a right of way, and the grass is, mowed once or twice a year. There's no trees anywhere near those lines. And part of the reason, I didn't realize this, but it makes sense, when you have a big load on those lines, the wire heats up. Now, whether it's aluminum or copper or whatever, it heats up, and when it heats up, it expands, and when it expands, your wire will sag. You can actually, I've seen pictures where they take a picture of the wire, during normal operations, then a picture of the wire from the same spot, when you're at capacity, and you'll have a significant what's called line sag. And so if you have any trees nearby, or if you have any wind, that line will start to sway, and you'll have potential issues. But as you know, one of the big pushes in California was to renewables, and I guess the other big issue was apparently some of the utilities out there allegedly, instead of spending the money, keeping their rights of way clear for the transmission and distribution, they sort of let things grow over a little bit. And of course, some of the environmentalists encouraged it. It's like, geez, let's go back to the, why do you want to cut all these trees down? It's like we need to, leave the natural look. And the most interesting thing is it's you hear people now talking about everything out there, and they're essentially blaming all this on, gee, it's global warming. And of course, this is not funny at all, but the interesting thing is, Jason, I mean, if it's global warming, how come this is only occurring really in California? I mean, we have utility fires elsewhere, but nothing on the scale that you're seeing out there. And so the whole policy issue, and I mean, you just hit, this is my number one issue, and I wouldn't have thought about this 2 or 3 years ago, and Lord knows, but when you have millions of people who are inconvenienced when their power is shut off for 2 or 3 days, their food goes bad. You can't get gasoline because the pumps don't work. You don't have air conditioning. You don't have heating. Thank God they have a pretty moderate climate out there. The economy, I mean, I guarantee you, I don't know what this does to the California economy, but if you don't have power, you're not doing a whole bunch of business transactions. It's probably, there are not too many hamburgers going out the door when you can't cook them. But the whole concept, and the other thing, and this is pretty surprising too, and you noted when one of the deals with cutting off the power here with these planned outages was because of the high winds, and the utility didn't say we can't operate our wind turbines when we have 80 mile an hour gusts, but that's exactly so what has happened is these companies realize and it's not an insignificant portion of your power anymore, it's a relatively large portion of power, especially incremental power, when you have to turn off your wind turbines because of wind gust, and you can't essentially what you have is a blackout, and you're either going to have a blackout if you keep it operating because you aren't going to have enough juice, and you're going to have voltage problems, you're going to have the hertz and everything, you're going to have all sorts of issues, or Um, essentially, it is a problem. Or if you take it offline purposely, I mean, you avoid those issues, but you create some real problems. So, and the killer of all this, Jason, is you're talking oil is expensive to drill, but when you're putting in electrical facilities and transmission lines, and you're talking hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars. And now you're hearing some people say, "Gee, California needs to bury all their utility lines." And it is interesting. I will say this: when I've been at some renewable operations, wind turbine operations in Oklahoma and Texas, almost all of them bury their transmission line, and part of the reason is for safety, and part of it the reason is for fire. They realize, a transmission line creates fire hazards. So in some of these areas where it's sort of interesting to see where they have to bury the line are pretty rocky. So it's more like a mining operation to get the darn line to the ground. It's pretty cool to see. But anyway, that'll be my number one story is California. And going forward, I mean, we do need, and I don't want to have any misunderstanding. I mean, going forward, we're going to need more electricity regardless. It grows with the economy. Now, whether it's gas, whether it's coal, whether it's wind, whether it's solar, I mean, the problem I have, and you mentioned it, was everything has been forced so quickly on us. The grid has been around for ages. It actually is not operated by anybody. I didn't, realize. I thought maybe the FERC or somebody in Washington, D.C. is, pulling all the triggers. And it's actually sort of like a bicycle with 1,000 different riders. And the neat thing about the grid is, your demand and supply have to balance instantaneously all the time. And actually it's sort of cool because we can, if I had a solar panel on my house, and I don't, and I put an electron in, I mean, it literally, if Texas was connected to the Southwest Power Pool, you could be pulling the electron out of that grid in North Dakota. But fortunately, Texas has their own grid, and then you have the North Dakota, Oklahoma, and a bunch of the states in the middle there have the Southwest Power Pool that they throw all their electrons in. So it's a very interesting concept, but it is not simple. It's not cheap. It's difficult to operate. To date, from what I've read, a lot of people are impressed that the system has been as stable as it is with so many renewables. Because as you know, I mean, the sun stops shining, in the evening. You're going to have to. We don't have the battery power economically doesn't work yet, so you have to kick on the natural gas spinning generation to back you up, and that actually causes a lot of pollution because the start and stop type of stuff causes more emissions than otherwise. And the neat thing is that this is really cool too, and you can appreciate this. Maybe in North Dakota, in Upper Michigan, they have some of the highest power prices in the nation. And up there, they also have a whole bunch of abandoned deep shaft mines. And so I'm working with a couple professors looking at, it's called pumped storage, where these mines are full of water, and the water's fresh water. I mean, water's really good quality stuff. It's up by Lake Superior. And if you have a wind turbine or a solar, you could actually, during the day, you can pump the water up to a pond on the surface, and then at night you can, when you need the water, instead of having a battery, when you need the power, you can turn the valve on in the turbine. The problem is you lose 30 or 35 or 40% of your power doing that, so it's not real efficient. But it's the old theory of the Tesla wall, they used to call it, or the batteries in those aren't real efficient. And when I've talked to people who install solar in residential, and when I talk to people who have installed these small wind turbine systems, there aren't many, but there are a few. They say generally, Joe, it'll cost you $30,000 to put a solar system on your roof, and then we'll use the grid as a backup. But if you want batteries, that's going to be another $10,000. So you're a large portion is batteries, and those batteries will only last for 12 to 24 hours, depending on the load in your house. So anyway, it's an interesting business, and it's, that's my number one story. And going forward, I guess to follow up on this is, the reason it's my number one story is I don't think we've seen the end of this. I mean, California, God bless those folks. I mean, they're going to have problems for the next few years as they try to figure this all out. And I will tell you, and this is somewhat scary, I mean, last week I had some guest speakers into my class, and I actually gave a presentation on renewables, and one of the things they pointed out, my guest speakers, is in Texas, in every system, you generally want to have some safe margin of safety, and the margin of safety in Texas has gotten much lower than it has historically. And part of the problem is from an economic standpoint, you don't want to spend $300 million unless you're going to be sure you're going to get a return. And with the renewables, with the solar, it's difficult. And with all the regulations on coal and pipelines, restrictions on natural gas, it's difficult to tell whether you're going to get what type of return you're going to get on your $200 or $300 million or more to build a power plant. So so they haven't been built. And so on September 6th, we had ERCOT had to send out an emergency notice, and actually I got one on my phone. I downloaded their app, and I think the Southwest Power Pool, where you're at, and if you're in Oklahoma and Nebraska, you can download their app too and see. But they actually send you a little push email, and please conserve power. We are having a power emergency, and this was like at 3 in the afternoon, and the emergency went from like 5 to 8 p.m., which is when the solar is going down. And the other thing is with renewables too, and I haven't. When you have wind power, apparently in the summer the wind does not blow as robustly as other times of the year. That's why you have ozone days down here. And of course, if it's hot and the wind's not blowing, you're not generating electricity using your wind turbine. You're going to have to, you have to go back to your gas turbines if you have enough gas turbines, or your coal plants. And coal plants are being retired at record numbers. So it's interesting. It's interesting to see, and they're old plants, and they've been reliable, and they're all been fully depreciated. But the bad news is there, Jason, when you go to a coal plant, you got a couple of dozen people working there, and they're usually pretty good jobs, paying wise. But when you go to a wind turbine facility, you got 3 people looking at a computer screen, and they're pretty good jobs, but you got 3 of them versus 36, and it doesn't really help the community economy quite as well. No,
and you just brought up a whole litany of issues that I have, is known as the renewable nightmare, the renewable ripple. I wanted to ask you about, you say you gave a presentation on it, you spoke on it. California, you consider it to be your story of the year. I want to throw 2 things your way, which I believe are very well showcased during California right now, because I think California is a very good example of what would happen if the rest of the country adapted a lot of the policies that California adopted, because science doesn't care about policy. Mother Nature doesn't care about policy. And the politicians have not figured that out yet, that there are just some things that don't adhere to Republican and Democrat policy. They just don't. And Mother Nature is one of those things. But I'll tell you, the one thing that does adhere to policy is income wages. And the one thing that is shown in terms of income and demographics when it comes to this green movement is that the poor suffer. The poor suffer. Is in California, there's more stories coming out every day about how the poor people are the ones affected the most. From the refrigerators going out to only the rich people have got some backup power of solar panels and that sort of thing, to the rich people can afford to have their brush removed. And they're buying out certain areas that are getting more water, so the lower income people are being forced into the drought areas. So, I mean, these stories are just coming out more and more every day. So the one side of it is that I wanted to ask you your opinion, because I think there's enough out there that most people can talk opinion and non-opinion based and not be political about this, because there is enough evidence to say that renewable energy right now can be argued it is discriminatory against poor people. The other one is the fact that when you have a power provider, they generally have a monopoly, and that monopoly is sponsored and supported by the state or the local government, and it's been a long standing relationship that's worked and not worked and worked and not worked. But I'll tell you right now what's happening in Minnesota. You mentioned Minnesota a few times. Xcel Energy's in Minnesota. And correct me if I'm wrong, but most, and I believe this is, most of the municipalities, when they have an agreement with these energy companies, is they don't profit on the energy. They profit on the infrastructure. And so when Xcel Energy needs to meet shareholders, so they got to go put up wind turbines, they can put a 10 to 15 or whatever the percentage is that they all agree upon to do additional projects like this. So this is a way for them to create revenue. And I'm looking at this as, boy, 10, 20 years from now, this could be some double dipping here, some big time double dipping. So anyway, I wanted to ask you about, as an educator and as trying to keep as much politics out of this, because I know what I just handed you was a loaded hand grenade, but I do think there's enough evidence to actually speak on this in somewhat of an educational, articulate, civil way to say the monopolies have been around for a long time, 100 years. And as far as the public-private partnership there. And then also the whole discrimination thing, your thoughts on those two loaded hand grenades I gave you?
Yeah, that's a good question. Part of the problem is, too, as you know, a lot of this is very intense emotions involved here. And I actually have a good friend who, at SMU, a professor I work with, and he went to London for a conference here 2 weeks ago, and he was going out the airport, and some climate change protester actually glued himself on top of the airplane. I mean, literally, Jason, he climbed up, on the gateway and glued himself, and then they were having all sorts of protests in downtown, London, to try to shut everything down. And so, there is not. It's difficult to have a rational debate on technology, especially when there's a bunch of uncertainties involved, and especially when money is involved. And of course, the interesting thing, this is sort of a tangent to where you were talking about, is a lot of these concepts of what you pay for power depends on the policy, and a lot of people who can afford to pay for higher power prices, for example, are big supporters of renewables. And I mean, there's a huge tax credit for, and there has been, for solar and for wind. And so, like I say, the joke in California was, every movie star had their own wind turbine at one time, just because the huge, you made profit off these, but you have to make good money to profit off that. But the concept is, California has some of the most expensive power in the United States, along with Hawaii, as well as Upper Michigan. Upper Michigan, you go, what? It was Upper Michigan. The problem is one of the huge coal plant that was up there on Lake Superior under the Obama administration with some of the new EPA coal rules, it shut. And so it was a very, very cheap source of power. It had been there, for decades and decades and decades, and now they have to import the power from elsewhere. So it's sort of interesting to see. But your policy, of power costs, and of course California is not quite as energy intensive as like North Dakota, where you have all the heating power use, but it's still the poor are more adversly impacted than those. I mean, it's the incremental income, and just the jobs. I mean, the jobs when you have drilling a gas well, laying a pipeline, running a processing plant, running a refinery, mining coal, shipping oil. Those are good paying jobs, and you don't have to have a doctorate in brain science to get those, although they're cyclical. But if you are mandating high cost renewables, the number of people involved in those operations, especially once they get it constructed, I mean, the wind turbine, the cost is free because the power, in theory, the power cost is almost zero because the wind blows, you get power. The same thing with sunshine, you get power. You don't need to have any operational expertise, etc. So that's those are sort of my thoughts there. And going forward, I do think. I mean, the whole concept, the technology too, is continuing to evolve. And the other thing I was going to mention, one of the problems you have with both solar and wind is trying to move the power to markets. And in Minnesota, I think was the site in the 1970s. I was actually going to school in Upper Michigan, and the Minnesota farmers got so mad because some of the dudes there in North Dakota, your state, were going to ship some power over to Minneapolis, and they went through these farm fields and put up these huge transmission poles, and all of a sudden they started getting blown up, and people got being shot at, and of course the utilities claim, well, gee, we have the right of way, and it's like, well, you got the right of way, but this is my farm field. But that whole concept of transmitting, and I'm thinking of the Texas Panhandle and the Oklahoma Panhandle, very sunny places, very windy places, but there isn't a lot of industry out there. So they actually had a big project. I mean, this is a $billion plus project out in the Oklahoma Panhandle, and I think they called it Project Windcatcher. And what they were going to do is they were going to, generate a bunch of renewable power out in the Oklahoma Panhandle, and they could because the wind and the sun is very intense out there. But they wanted to bring it all the way across Oklahoma, across Arkansas, and dump the power off in Memphis. And apparently the people in Arkansas, when it got to the state line, the Arkansas government said, what's in it for us? And the local citizens just went nuts. It's like, geez, you're going to generate all this power out in the Oklahoma Panhandle. Of course, the people in Oklahoma apparently were, at least the politicians, were okay with it going, through the Panhandle down to Tulsa and over to Tulsa and down across. But the concept in Arkansas, it's like, what's in it for us? Number one, and number two, as we see in California, these lines are not entirely non-hazardous because they do catch fire from time to time. They do have issues. They get struck by lightning, as well as just they're not an ice. I guess depends on your view. I don't mind towers, although I would never buy a house where I looked out and saw any type of, if I could avoid it, any type of transmission towers. But some people say they're an eyesore, and of course, as you know, in North Dakota, portions of it, as well as Minnesota, you start putting, or in western Oklahoma too, and western Texas, you put a transmission tower up, and you can see it for 10 miles away. It's just that's just the nature of the landscape, and as well as wind towers. I mean, you have the same wind turbines, you have the same issue with them, and unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, there's been a number of cases in Texas. It's pretty cool, and I teach the law. So, if you don't like, your neighbor's going to put up a wind turbine. You don't like the way it looks. You think you bought this house because you're out, you can fish, you can hunt, and you don't want to see that thing. Can you file suit and stop them from putting up their wind turbine? The answer, according to the Texas courts, are no. Aesthetics. And part of the deal is, and I have to agree with this, the court reason, what is pretty and what is not is everybody has different judgments. And Jason, if you're going to build a house across from me and I could file a suit and said, hey, I don't like the color of your garage door, essentially what the court said is just giving me subjective judgment to really zone your property. That's your property to deal with. And same thing, whether it's the color of your garage door or whether you put a wind turbine up or whether you put up, solar panels, although living I live in a residential area, and you probably do too. And, you have homeowners association restrictions with regard to where you can put these things up, and obviously you also have safety issues with regard to the city ordinances. But this whole transmission issue is a huge issue, and it's going to. And in California, their grid has not been upgraded. The trees and brush have not been maintained the way they should. And then you're throwing a bunch of renewables, onto the grid. You it's a it's a yeah, it's a puzzle with no really good solution.
It's going to be a little bit difficult too because a lot of the pipelines are getting 40, 30, 50 years old. We're talking pipelines for not only crude but natural gas. So a lot of the infrastructure will be having to be looked at. And we've had conversations on this program in the past year, which I think it's a very good question. I think especially for next year, it should be asked, should pipelines be considered critical infrastructure? And our opinion is that, yeah, it should be. And a lot of, the Department of Defense and energy and a lot of the government agencies deem pipeline infrastructure as critical infrastructure. But with the new movement, the new green movement, and the new accepted forms of discrimination and bullying, and I'm trying to be very sterile when I say that, because I've even got down preferred versus renewed, because the way that they've been looking the other way on the ushering in of wind energy blows my mind. This is all very bizarre to me. This is very bizarre to me, Joe. You're an educator. There has never been one of these giant wind turbines ever decommissioned, so nobody has any idea how much it's going to cost. What they're starting to find out now is that these batteries need to be replaced. There is an economical and ecological footprint behind each one of those lithium-powered battery cells. Now, when we start looking at some of the renewable energy here, there is no evidence even to show that there's a positive output over a negative output over 20 years, because you're having to redo so much, and we're having to re-scrap this and having to go back. And I'll tell you, I'm starting to almost question this whole overall movement more and more, because the wind energy seems to be the popular way to go. I can't believe that the U.S. wildlife knows that wind energy turbines are the number one cause for the slow extinction of the golden eagle in the Southwest. And Obama's administration, it was during his time, so it's not against that, but that's the way that history has it, is the Obama administration made it okay for wind turbines to kill golden eagles. Now, before then, it wasn't okay. And then Duke University got fined millions of dollars in Wyoming, and it turned into a big kerfuffle. And then the Obama administration made it okay for the wind turbines to kill bats and birds and bees and everything else. To me, that's a big story. And this was first brought up in in Wyoming at the Energy Exposition for the first time. Senate Minority Leader John Cook, out of Greeley, Colorado, Weld County, number one oil and gas producing county in Colorado. He referred to wind and energy as preferred, or wind and solar as preferred, not renewable, but preferred. And I agreed with him in the moment, and I still agree with him today, because hydro and nuclear are renewable, but they're never in the conversation. And nuclear is considered renewable. Now, a lot of the stuff leading up to it isn't, but the actual energy itself is, and then hydro, of course, is as well. The way they're looking, I mean, Joe, have you talked about this? Have you ever been on a class or a presentation about how, the whole, killing the birds and the bats and the bees, that's okay, and the lithium being in the batteries, how they seem to get this free pass for things that arguably are much worse than fossil fuel and coal.
Yeah, it's what's interesting to see, because the way I balance it, Jason, you have to be diplomatic, and I hate to compare myself to a politician, because none of them are diplomatic these days.
You're an educator. You have to be.
I'm an educator, yeah. But it's we need more energy. Every different form of energy has its advantages and disadvantages. I will say, having grown up and been around both the mining and the oil and gas business, that is where having grown up in the era when utilities were regulated, you could not, if you had a wind turbine on your farm and you wanted to plug in, in 1970 to the utility and transport or sell it to them, they didn't have to take it, and they wouldn't take it. They'd say, hey, the heck with you. The whole concept, so I'm preferential to the old style utility setup, because I know it works. I mean, Lord knows there were issues. We had the 1970 blackout or 19 whatever is in New York City, but the grid for the most part was well regulated. It was stable. That's one reason. If you don't have electricity, you really do screw up the economy. You screw up businesses. You screw up people's lives. And so in California, even once or twice a year, if you're out without power for 2 or 3 days, and I guess this all sort of struck home. I'll just go in Texas. Every once in a while we have a hurricane blow in. It's usually in Houston or Galveston or down. And when a hurricane blows in, unfortunately, those poor folks are out without power, for maybe a week. I mean, it's tough to tell. And it doesn't happen often, but then you hear the stories of I have Houston buddies, and they'll come up to Dallas and they'll talk about what it's like to live without electricity, and it's and especially in a humid climate like that. It's in the summer. It's pretty brutal with no food and everything, and it's of course they can the magic of fossil fuels and getting in your car and being able to drive 200 miles north to a city that has air conditioning and food is sort of a miracle. But looking at that, I mean, you realize how critical the system is, and the fact there's a whole bunch of unanswered questions with regard to not only the impact. Like one of the latest, you probably didn't see this recently. It was a BBC article, I think, or it was in the British. They apparently, according to some scientists, it's called SF6. It's used in the electric equipment to keep everything from catching fire, but it's used mainly in Europe apparently. But it is the most potent greenhouse gas known to man, according to the article. And apparently they've had a few leaks of that. So in essence, while we are putting in these, especially in Europe, all these wind turbines, essentially to protect the environment and reduce the greenhouse gases, they are emitting not through the wind turbine, but through the electric equipment that they use over there. And I've heard people talk about SF6. I'm going to check it out more later this week. I'm going to meet with some utility folks and find out what the story is in the United States. But the fact is, in Europe and elsewhere, the amount of greenhouse gas is it's like having like 1.3 million cars on the road, for a year is what the article said. Now, Lord knows if those folks know what they're talking about, but it was and I've seen it. There's an investment banker out of Houston. I think it's called PPHG Group or whatever, and they have a newsletter, and that's what I saw it about a month ago in there. And then I saw the article in the British newspaper or magazine, and actually I posted it on LinkedIn and ask anybody if they know about it. And I got a couple private emails saying, yeah, this stuff has been around. Yeah, this stuff is a really, really potent. It's the most potent greenhouse gas there is that's known to man. And here we are putting in wind turbines, which are one of the goals. One of the goals I thought was, to reduce global warming and reduce emissions and reduce some of those issues. So, and how all this fits together, technologically, pollution-wise, reliability, cost-wise, it's a difficult puzzle to put together, Jason. I mean, I've studied it for 4 or 5 years now. And and I'm not sure. There's a lot of answers I don't know. But like you, I am concerned that shoving all of the renewables into the system as fast as we have, using tax incentives, when there's indications there are secondary effects like killing birds or vaporizing birds with the mirror systems or whatever. As well as just transmission lines, transmission losses, as well as you know, just the mining question. I mean, and the other thing is everybody, when you go, you listen to the people, and I've been to a number of at least the solar people I got to admit, everybody's been great to me. I show up at and they'll tell me, and answer honestly what they think. But one of the questions I have is, well, if I put a solar system on my house, or I put it, want to generate, how long will that solar cell last? Oh, 25 years. Oh, and it's like, well, how do you know it's going to be 25 years? Because they haven't been around for 25 years. Well, it's warranted for 25 years. It's like, well, that doesn't mean, they can replace it, if it doesn't, but from a material and impact standpoint, if they have to take my roof and replace it after 12 years and take that stuff to the dump, I don't know what's in a solar cell. So I don't know if you can take it to the dump or whether that's actually hazardous material.
That's hazardous.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah, you just can't, you're not supposed to be just throwing it out. There's certain things that you need to be doing. There's silicon in there, and some of them even has quartz coal. So,
okay.
There's some issues. Solar, I don't usually dog on solar as much, as a journalist, because solar is not as bad for the environment as wind. Wind is terrible for the environment. Wind is terrible for the economy. Solar has not been as bad. In fact, like I've said for years, solar, they give us some decent cell phone charging batteries. They, for some people that want to live off the grid, it's a good way to supplement something else with a wood burning stove or a natural gas or something along those lines. Solar's, been around for a long time. Humans have figured out a way to do it in a lot of different ways, from cooking to heating and a number of different things. And we'll figure it out. We will figure it out. The farmers 150 years ago, 100 years ago, were more efficient with wind energy than we are today. We've gone the wrong direction. That's all. We're not figuring out wind. We're going the wrong direction with wind. Solar, I do believe we're going in the right direction. Solar, the problem with solar is it's adherent to a battery. You have to have a battery. Otherwise, you can't use it at night. And therein lies the problem with solar. And everybody's okay with that. There was rumor of a terawatt battery a few years ago, probably 4 or 5 years ago. I haven't heard anything from it since. So they weren't, kind of like Cummins I want to say 5-6 years ago, I talked to the VP of Cummins, and they just could not get that engine over the Rocky Mountain efficiently enough. They just could not for liquid natural gas. They just couldn't do it. And so I haven't heard much, in the way of sweeping LNG, CNG trucks, taking over Swift and the trucking companies. So, they're slowly doing it. Don't get me wrong. They're making decent enough strides, but it's not, I don't know. I look at solar and wind, 30, 40 years of subsidies, 20 years of having it ramped up. You've got the government forcing people to do things, and this is as far as you've gotten. I think it's time that we pull the reins back a little bit and have a little bit of assessment time. And just to do that, it seems like it's really difficult to get. By the way, I did want to ask you, as we wrap up here, I'm taking a look at the clock, about remote drilling, artificial intelligence on the well. That's obviously another top 5 story of the year. I do believe most people, if not all, energy companies are going to have conversations or put it in their budget for next year. Remote drilling, I think we're to that point now to where I think we're in the 90s now with cable television. I think we're over 80% now. You know what I mean? We're starting to get so just your thoughts on remote drilling, artificial intelligence on the well site, where that whole direction is going. I think we're over the 50-yard line though.
Yeah, that's a good question. That's an area I really have not looked in very much. In 2 weeks, I'm going to go up. I have looked into artificial intelligence with regard to drone use and drone pipeline inspections, and I know actually North Dakota is involved with this. A couple of your agencies are, as well as some industry folks, where if you take a drone or you take satellite imagery of, say, a pipeline and you run it daily, versus you run the drone or you run the satellite image daily, you can use artificial intelligence to tell you, gee, there's something that, and they can identify potentially a spill or some type of incident much quicker than than you would know otherwise by alarm, especially if it's a smaller leak, because a smaller leak, you're not going to have any pressure differential. You're not going to lose that much liquid. But you'll be able to see it, or the artificial intelligence will be able to pick it up. And so I'm familiar with AI with drone use, and but past the drilling aspects, I really haven't. Drilling, Jason. Well, actually, it is interesting. Drilling evolves and is moving so quickly. I actually was at a drill bit plant in August, and they were talking, well, a couple of points. They were talking how things were really slowing down, and they were very concerned. And they said, number one, so they said, we're not laying everybody off, but if the rig count continues to fall, people aren't going to use that many bits that they used to, and we'll have to cut back. And so I think they're probably at that point now. Number one. Number two, they said all these drill bits are computer designed, but it depends on whether you're in the Bakken, whether you're in the Barnett, whether you're in the Permian, what formation. Each operator might have a preference as to the design of their bit. It's sort of like having, you buy a Corvette and you put a big fin on the back, and I put a big fin on the front, and they both get what they want, where they want to go quickly, but you customize your bid is what I'm trying to say.
It's absolutely incredible.
They're and they have these little containers they ship them in. They look like big, bowling ball containers, except they're really heavier than heck. But so all the bits are generally specialized, and they said the company, they'll look at the designs, and it's a custom. It's like building a custom car, and they said it depends. You can increase the penetration rate. I mean, there's all sorts of different variables they look at that when they design this stuff. So it's pretty cool. And as to talk to the engineer, he was a big Nebraska football fan too. So I was giving him a hard time about what this coming season is going to look like. So I haven't even kept track of Nebraska. I'm not sure how well they're doing this year. But in any event, it was interesting hearing him talk about, he's a mechanical engineer, and he got in this business 30 years ago, and everything used to be hand design, and now it's all on, CAD CAM or whatever they call it. That probably is not even the latest software, but it's all, he has the bit there. He can rotate it. They wouldn't let me take pictures. They said, put your camera away, buddy, because this is all confidential. We don't want, to see any of this stuff on LinkedIn when we're showing our competitors what we're doing. So I thought that was sort of funny. They were very nice about it, but I totally understood. I said, hey, I wouldn't let me take pictures either, bud.
Yeah, I think the bigger thing is, you're right, where the artificial intelligence mostly is going to be ushered in through a security or a monitoring into the oil industry. And it's already started, but I think it's ramping up more and more. And then I do think the remote drilling, though, is catching on more and more from the people I've been talking to where those are probably two of the bigger innovation leaps, I think, that you're going to see next year. As we have next year's conversation, I think that'll be a bigger story. But I like your precision fabrication story there, because that's true. So many of these customizations, or so many of these companies are into customization to where you can almost do that shale play by shale play now, because if you're going to order 100 of those drill bits, you might as well get them customized.
Right. It's a high tech deal, and it's all, the machine shop. It's really neat to see. I will tell you what the story of next year will be if you want to end on that.
You bet. We got about 3 minutes, so sounds good.
All right. Well, the story of next, with the rig count falling relentlessly for the entire year, we're down 23% year over year. People are going to be shocked, Jason, at how little oil production gains there are from the United States, from the shale plays. We have increased our efficiencies very quickly, but I can't even remember essentially I think we're down. We have 822 rigs running now. We're down 245. We have 245 rigs that are missing. When the market figures out that we aren't going to be flooded with oil, prices are going to be much higher next year for oil, and it'll be supply and demand, assuming we don't have a major recession. And just because we aren't going to have the million or million and a half additional barrels from the United States, we'll be lucky to be even, in my opinion. Just because when you're down 23%, I mean, 23% is a lot of rigs. It's a lot of people, and it's a lot of oil, and it's a lot of oil that's not going to get produced. And the street has not caught on to that.
I agree. In fact, I was just telling someone the other day. They work in the heating and cooling and the boiler industries, and I said, you cannot have 20 to 25% of the only industry that created jobs over the last 10 years. Now, keep in mind, the only industry that has a net gain of jobs is the mining industry. So if the only industry that is creating jobs is laying now percentage, say, well, I don't know, 10% of the industry's been laid off or whatever it has been, that is going to have a ripple into next year, because when the rig counts are down, that means that less people are buying 5 Monster Energy drinks and 3 sandwiches every day at the gas station. Well, when the oil changes are down and the haircuts are down, when that happens, people usually wait till after Christmas before they start laying off people. People that are not adherent to shareholders, and they don't, you know what I mean? People who, can still have a heart, those type of people, they usually wait till after Christmas. And that's why I do think you're not going to see a lot of this till next year, because I'm already starting to hear. Let me tell you about a quick email as I wrap up here. I got this morning from a guy. He got a quote not even 8 months ago for some shipping stuff that was going to happen in November. Well, he just got the new quote they sent him, and it was 300% higher than what the quote was. In 6 to 8 months, their business had changed that much, and they've had that much changes, I guess, in whatever supply chain they got as a distribution company, that they had to go back to them and say, it's going to now be 300% more than we quoted you not even a year ago. That's incredible. That to me is a sign of the times, and what's going to go on next year is you're going to start to see that happen as well, because like you said, you can't, when rigs are down 23%, things are, something's going to happen with that. That's just the way it goes. I mean, every time in the course of history it's happened, and it usually takes a little bit of a ripple effect beyond that. So, all right, sir. Well, that's some good stuff. We got rig counts, renewable energy, we got artificial intelligence, California's wildfire, coal power, natural gas, all kinds of different things for story of the year. So we'll be talking soon. And last word, any final thoughts as we wrap the year up?
Jason, no final thoughts other than my SMU Mustang football team is doing really well this year. So hopefully they'll make it to a playoff game, and maybe we'll see a team from North Dakota up, somewhere in some playoff game and some reasonable abode where it's actually not snowing.
Well, I'm sure we'll be down in Frisco, Texas, like we have in the past 7 years. Actually, North Dakota State's going for its 7th straight championship, or 7th championship in 8 years. But
awesome.
It's Division II,
awesome.
Division I AA, whatever it is, FCS. I call it Division II still, which is showing you my age. But it's the one class below Alabama, but they still call it Division I. And so,
right.
Yeah, we go to Frisco, Texas every year. I mean, it's lock, stock, and barrel. Again, we're number 1 again this year, undefeated, still rolling through each person. And so if we don't win this year, it'll be an upset. SMU, I saw you guys had a tough game the other day. Anyway, I better get going. I got another interview lined up. We can talk. Otherwise, now we're going to get into football, and we'll talk all. I did a sports talk show for 12 years, so I can talk sports all day long. Sports, so important. You got to say it 3 times. So,
all right, Jason. We'll talk again. Thanks again.